Welcome. Let's start this bulletin with Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden closing in on the 270. The Trump campaign has made claims of fraud and threatened multiple legal actions to stall presidential verdicts. In our next report, we are going to break down how the states see the recount law. Each state has its own rules and regulations. Now, first up is the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where Joe Biden has taken a lead with 49.5% of the votes, followed by Trump with 49.4% of the votes. The difference in votes is only 5,594 votes. In Pennsylvania, there is an automatic provision for a recount. As per the law, the recount happens automatically if the margin of victory is less than or equal to 0.5%. But for a recount to happen automatically, the deadline is 5 p.m. by the second Thursday following the election, which means the 12th of November. Now, just a while ago, the recounting of votes in Georgia was announced. Georgia was the closest to finish its counting. Less than 10,000 votes to be counted. It has become a fight to the finish right now. Both Biden and Trump have 49.4% of the vote share, and Biden is leading by a small margin of just 917 votes. However, there is no provision of an automatic recount in Georgia. As per the law, a candidate can request a recount if the margin of victory is less than or equal to 0.5%. And the recount must be requested within 2 business days after the results have been certified. Now, there is no result yet, but both Biden and Trump camps have read what they had from the latest tally. Both sides put out statements earlier this evening, both contrary to one another and taking potshots at the other. Let's start with the statement put out by the Trump campaign. It's a pretty long one indeed, and has been signed by Trump's campaign general counsel, Matt Morgan, and here's what it reads. The election is not over. The false projection of Joe Biden as the winner is based on results in 4 states that are far from final. Now, the Trump campaign goes on to claim there were many irregularities in Pennsylvania without providing any evidence. Trump's team also claims that in Nevada, thousands of individuals cast ballots improperly. Now, we do not know what they mean by improper, and the campaign has again not provided any evidence to back their claims. The statement from the Trump campaign also goes on to name Fox News and Associated Press. What for? The campaign claims that they are erroneously called Arizona in favor of Biden, only to add that the president is quote-unquote on course to win Arizona outright. Now, here's how the statement ends. Biden is relying on these states for his phony claim on the White House. But once the election is final, President Trump will be re-elected. Let's now look at the statement put out by the Biden campaign. Now, as we said, on the 19th of July, the American people will decide this election, and the United States government is perfectly capable of escorting trespassers out of the White House. Numbers have changed quite a lot since these statements were put out. All the latest ahead in this bulletin. Now, WION correspondent Susan Tehrani is joining us live from New York for more on this. Susan, thank you for being with us. This has been a record-breaking election on a number of fronts, and we've seen unprecedented actions. Take us through, we know that Georgia is going into a recount. Take us through some of the key battleground states that are yet to be decided.
That's right. Only a handful left, really. Georgia has announced that there will be a recount because there has been such a small margin and it's hard to determine. We have to take into consideration that Pennsylvania may take longer than expected, although we were waiting for results coming in the next few hours, just because they say that military ballots, about 9,000 military ballots, have not been counted yet. So those need to come in. We need to figure out what's happening with there. And then we have Arizona, which, despite the fact that, 2 news organizations and wires prematurely announced the victory, those votes haven't been counted. Either North Carolina is most probably going to stay with Donald Trump. We're waiting for results on that as well. And Alaska as well, usually voting Republican. That's only 1 electoral vote, but we can't not invite Alaska to the party since we're in an election right now.
Right. And Susan, this legal tussle, Trump has alleged voter fraud. He's used some very strong language with no evidence. He's potentially using a dangerous attempt at undermining democracy. Take us through some of the legalities that apply to this.
Right. Well, first of all, Donald Trump needs to have a case. He needs to have evidence. He said that there are evidence, and I think everyone is looking for the Trump campaign to come out with concrete evidence. And if this has happened, it's very likely, and I've talked to Democratic and Republican strategists alike, that they will look into it. It's not that because Donald Trump is saying it and they don't like Donald Trump, they're just going to basically refuse his claims. But the problem right now is they have not provided any evidence to the American people. And by making these claims, ultimately undermines the people that went out and voted and stood in line or voted by mail-in ballots due to the coronavirus pandemic. They're now questioning whether or not their vote's going to be counted or not. So it kind of creates this kind of uncertainty around the validity of America's election. I think that's why you see a lot of Republicans not really coming out openly and supporting the president. We had Ted Cruz come out. We had a few other supporters like Matt Gaetz that always support the president come out. But they didn't really come out and say there was fraud. They said, if you have evidence, we support you. Come out and we'll take a look at it. But so far, we haven't seen any. What I do know is that in some states, the Trump campaign has provided hotlines, phone numbers for people who witness anything suspicious to call them and let them know so they can go and see what's going on over there. This itself kind of seems a little shaky, you know, to provide a hotline for ordinary people to go out and see if they see anything suspicious. It just shows that the grounds aren't very stable regarding these claims. And it's a dangerous one. It's a dangerous path to go down if you don't have evidence.
Absolutely. And we see it playing out on the streets. There are protests going on in different parts of the country. People are boarding up their shops in anticipation of violence. What is the latest that you're hearing on this?
That's right. Law enforcement is on high alert, as you know, and have reported there's been skirmishes and violence and back and forth confrontations between the police and protesters. Here in New York, the protesters are demanding to, quote unquote, count all votes. That's what usually happens with Democratic cities, progressive cities, liberal cities. On the other side, you have the president's supporters who are saying stop the vote, which on the one hand seems pretty bizarre to until just a few days ago. That's how we made decisions on presidential elections. We don't just stop the vote. But I guess their argument is ballots that come in after a certain time and a certain date for certain states should be stopped. And you know, the states have adhered to these policies and the rule of law until now. I mean, once again, there's been no evidence that they haven't, or they've sort of counted a bunch of votes that came in at a certain hour. That hasn't happened. But it just shows what a strong platform these two candidates and leaders have, that when they make a claim or they ask something, their supporters just come out in the street and start protesting and sometimes creating violence and arrests and unrest.
Right.
Like we saw here in New York and Washington.
Absolutely. Susan, thank you very much for bringing us all the latest on the U.S. elections.